Our keynote speaker tonight is Corey Owens, CEO of Bonta Gelato. Prior to a very tasty midlife crisis, he spent the bulk of his career at the cutting edge of technology-driven innovation. Corey was the chief marketing officer of Metropolis Technologies and head of global public policy at WeWork, roles that found him advocating for change in how communities and regulators think about the built environment. Previously, he was at the first head of global public policy at Uber Technologies and the head of state public policy at Facebook, a role which gave Corey his first taste of the glory of Central Oregon when he worked on the Prineville Data Center project. Welcome, Corey.
Must find a place for the beer first. First priorities. Hi. The big button is the forward button. Hi, so I'm Corey Owens, and I'm the CEO of Bonta Gelato, and I am here to talk about the etymology of milk. Yeah, because when Edco very kindly invited me here tonight, I was sitting here thinking, like, you know what people like more than Worthy Brewing's award-winning Saison? Etymology. We also might talk about MySpace, double-decker buses, try that 5 times fast, and fire escapes, but mostly the meaning of milk. I can't see if this works, so you'll have to tell me if it doesn't. I first came to Central Oregon 15 years ago. I was, as was just said, working for a little company called Facebook. My parents were extremely concerned because I'd given up a real job to do so. Because you see, I'm not an engineer. There are many kinds of engineers, some of them in the audience. Facebook employs many kinds of engineer. I am no kind of engineer. You see, I was, until fairly recently, a lobbyist. Gasp. There is gambling in this establishment. When I interviewed at Facebook, they said, "What do you know about data centers?" And I said, "I don't know, big buildings where pictures of cats live." And they're like, yeah, that's about right. "What do you know about riparian rights and energy tariffs?" I was like, abso-fucking-lutely nothing. And they're like, "That's great. Get on a plane to Redmond, rent a car, and ask somebody how to get to Prineville." And so I spent several of the next few years of my life, there we go, in Central Oregon, working on what would become the data center complex in Prineville. And so in addition to all of the other reasons my parents were concerned that I didn't have a real job, now I'm working for the internet in Prineville. Why was I in Prineville? The answer, MySpace. So MySpace was actually pretty early to the social media game, much earlier than Facebook, in fact. But nobody in this room spends any time thinking about your first friend, MySpace Tom, while meanwhile, Facebook Zuck runs a gajillion-dollar empire. And as I was writing this bit, I found myself realizing I'm dating myself. Raise your hand if you know who MySpace Tom is. Okay, I feel better. Thank you. Good. Anybody who's watched David Fincher's movie, The Social Network, knows that the reason Facebook finally won that war was MySpace's sloppy advertising and Facebook's aura of exclusivity. But I'll let you in on a little secret. Facebook's internal data at the time made overwhelmingly clear that Facebook users stuck and MySpace users churned because of latency. Latency, oversimplified version, is it's the delay between when you click on the thing and when the thing you clicked on did the thing you wanted it to do. MySpace had a latency problem. People clicked on things, and not a lot happened for a while. There's a lot of solutions to latency, the modern versions of which have something to do with the fact that the phone in your pocket has more computing power than the Apollo mission that put the man on the moon. But the simplest solution to latency is one that anybody who tried to get a beer at the bar outside would understand. Put the thing people want closer to the people who want them. That fixes latency. So, in the case of internet companies, that means having data centers with pictures of cats close to the people who want to see pictures of cats. And so Facebook started building its first 2 data centers in Prineville, Oregon, and Rutherford County, North Carolina. Has anybody in this room by chance been to Rutherford County, North Carolina? Yes? Okay, so a couple people in the room will know where I'm going with this. Both places are, in addition to being gorgeous, lightly mountainous, so the air is cool and dry for much of the year, which helps maintain server temperature. They also have oodles of power in the grid from a legacy of timber and manufacturing. And Rutherford and Prineville, Oregon, both were in desperate search for really good jobs. And they were willing to do a lot to bring them to town. And this is where I will first suggest the theme of this evening's talk. Nearly every great new entrant to the market will tell you that they are a technological innovator. A few of them are. More of them are business model disruptors. But nearly every one of them worked very hard to ensure that when the government was picking winners and losers, they were picked as a winner, or perhaps more importantly, not picked as a loser. Because building data centers requires staggering, like really staggering amounts of money, power, and water. Facebook in 2009 did not have staggering amounts of money, power, or water. And there were a number of really annoying local, county, and state laws that imposed wonderful requirements like paying property tax, not slurping up the groundwater, and paying the regulated tariff on power consumed. Shall we cut to the chase? Facebook ultimately paid a fraction of the taxes, consumed millions of gallons of water, and paid materially less for power than you do at your own home. And right now, someone at EDCO is going, oh shit, is this the talk he's giving? Don't worry. Because you see, my role in the Prineville Data Center project was actually, I see Roger Lee in the back, he's like literally like sweating. You see that my role in the Prineville Data Center project was actually mostly in Salem. Really, like, I want to like take this down, would you guys mind? There we go. Was mostly in Salem, convincing legislators to cut what was then a very small company, a very large tax break. And please ignore the straw that we have dropped into the aquifer. I spent a lot of my own time on this project, but mostly what I spent was a boatload of Mark Zuckerberg's money. And from the beginning, it was not super clear to me. Why am I spending this relatively small company's limited capital on lobbyists and PR firms and campaign contributions? Why? Because MySpace. Because beating MySpace was as much about securing regulatory outcomes as it was anything David Fincher told you about. To beat MySpace, you need less latency than they have. To get less latency than they have, you need more data centers. And to get data centers, you need power, water, and money. And to get power, water, and money, you work the refs. Facebook was a technological innovator, no doubt, but it also worked really, really hard to put its finger on the scale when governments were picking winners and losers. If you recognize any elected officials in these pictures, for instance, then State Treasurer Ted Wheeler, it is not your imagination. Let's just say that MySpace Tom did not get any tax breaks from Salem. Which brings us, believe it or not, to double-decker buses. During my time at Facebook, I was living in a middle-class black neighborhood in Northeast Washington, D.C. Amazing neighborhood, amazing neighbors, can't get a taxi to save your life. The taxis would stop for me downtown, white guy in a suit, but whenever I told them where I needed to go, they suddenly had a pressing engagement elsewhere. The gentleman in this stock photo here is both more attractive than me and wearing a nicer suit, but would have a harder time getting a taxi back then. Seriously, when you leave here, Google hailing while black. It is actually a fascinating public policy problem and deeply depressing. This was all a problem for me, the white guy in the suit, because I love beer. And so after a long day at Facebook, I would go get beers with some friends, and then I would have a dilemma, because I would have a choice between driving after drinking or standing on a street corner for 30 minutes hoping somebody would actually take me home. And so when an on-demand car service called Uber Taxi rolled into town, I was sold. He didn't have to tell me much more because I could drink beer and not go to jail. This is a winning combination for me. So I actually cold called the company. And I said, put me in, coach. And a very short time later, I'm on a plane to London, where that city's famous black cabs were protesting Uber's arrival by stopping their cars in the middle of intersections in the middle of rush hour. A protest tactic that is famously successful at bringing people alongside your cause. But Uber, like Facebook, was not actually anything new. Don't tell the Uber people I told that, or the Facebook people for that matter. Lots of companies had tried putting taxi hailing online. Lots of companies had tried putting digital maps in taxis. And lots of companies had tried getting taxi drivers to take credit cards. So when Uber arrived in London, much like everywhere else, it arrived to a graveyard of failed would-be Ubers. Disruptors all. And every one of them killed in its infancy by regulators who had a very strong opinion about what constituted winning and losing in the taxi game. The really odd thing, though, about London is London's local regulator, called Transport for London, is known around the world as a tough, fair, and progressive transportation regulator. We're not talking about Boston's taxi political cronies. We're not talking about Mexico City's taxi crime families. We're not even talking about Istanbul's politically connected drag queens that own taxi medallions. That is actually a thing, by the way. London was supposed to be the vanguard of smart transportation policy. So what gives? London's taxi system is older than the United States. which is a thing you could say about a lot of things in London, but I really enjoy any excuse to say the Waterman on the Thames. Try it with me now, the Waterman on the Thames. It comes out very nice. And over a few hundred years, regulators in London had taken a number of steps to professionalize for-hire transportation, which led in 1865 to the introduction of a test called the knowledge. Dun, dun, dun. The dun, dun, dun is optional, but it helps when you say the knowledge. Because the knowledge is a 12-part test of London's streets, landmarks, and tourist attractions. It takes most people 38 months to complete. 38-month test if you know the streets of London. And in a pre-digital age, it made London's taxis the best in the world. Indisputably the best taxi system in the world, thanks to the knowledge. Enter stage left. Which one's stage left? One of those is stage left. Enter stage left, regulatory capture. Thousands of London cabbies had spent years of their lives studying for a test, and Transport for London had spent literally a century telling anyone who would listen that really high barriers to entry were the only way to ensure safe, reliable for-hire transportation. Everybody who had made it inside London's walled garden of taxis had very strong incentives to keep the gates closed. So by the time Uber launched in London, in the wake of dozens of failed would-be Ubers before it, Transport for London and the black cabs had a set of tried and true explanations for why startups like this should be outlawed and why the system they'd all invested in so much should prevail. My favorite of their arguments, that GPS is unreliable as a tracking and navigation technology. Which brings us back to double-decker buses. Because you see, really unfortunately, Transport for London also regulates that city's iconic double-decker buses, which, wait for it, rely on GPS for navigation and tracking. Uber's innovation wasn't in the business model. Taxi drivers dispatched by a central system that takes a cut of the fare is literally the world's second oldest profession. Technological innovations were meaningful, but they were derivative. Lots of people had tried putting digital maps in taxis before. Uber's innovation, if there was one, was damn the torpedoes. It was, we're gonna break the law, and we're gonna wait and see how that plays out. Because regulators pick winners and losers for a lot of reasons. Some of them are good and fair and noble, and some of them because angry commuters are pissed at black cabs for blocking traffic, and agitated young people are blasting elected officials on social media. Regulators around the world had protected taxis for more than a century, using regulatory might to crown the cabs the winners, and by definition, everyone else losers, an outcome that made taxi medallion owners around the world fat and happy. Ask any taxi medallion owner today how they feel about regulators picking winners and losers. Which a little bit oddly brings us to fire escapes. Working at Uber was not an especially pleasant experience. My wife can attest to it was not an especially sane-making experience for me. I've worked for very strong personalities, Zuck, Sheryl Sandberg, but Travis Kalanick was a different ball of wax. There's genius, and then there's crazy, and then there's just asshole. And so I did the only reasonable thing that somebody who was tired of working for crazy assholes did. I went to work for Adam Newman at WeWork. You see, Adam Newman is the P.T. Barnum of my generation. It's actually, I'm not kidding, it's honestly a sight to behold. Like, it's impressive to watch him work a room. There was a period of a couple years there where almost literally every human who heard his pitch was ensorcelled. And in particular in New York City, his whole, I grew up on a kibbutz and thus we should work in shared spaces spiel had a waiting and willing audience. It's a side story real quick that's not entirely related to my point, but it's fun. I once was staffing Adam at a speech he was gonna give in the Bronx. And we walk in the building and the unnamed elected official who met us and was supposed to introduce Adam on stage that day says, Adam, I'm so grateful. Like what you're gonna do in this community is amazing, you have my thanks. I hear you like weed and tequila, and so I have shot glasses and a joint in the green room. Would you care to join me? And so Adam and this elected official both gave their remarks 2 sheets to the wind, which is a true story. When he wasn't blazed or giving his utopian spiel, Adam's pitch was actually pretty cogent and compelling because office space in big cities is so expensive in no small part to the fact that it's underutilized. And with fairly simple applications of modern design and technology, you could, WeWork could, squeeze more paying tenants into the same square foot. It's not as sexy as let's all work in a kibbutz, but it's a decent commercial proposition. The thing is, if you guys can see this, the thing is, Adam, like Zuck and Travis, was not the first person to have this idea. Anybody seen Gangs of New York? You'll know that cramming way too many people into New York City buildings is not a new idea. And so over a couple hundred years, New York City regulators had developed this fairly long and daunting list of things you had to do before you could put people in a building, not the least of which is reasonable egress in the case of a fire. Before we continue, can we just all agree as thinking humans, reasonable people can disagree if tax credits for data centers is a good idea. Reasonable people can disagree if a 38-month test of city streets is a good idea for a taxi license. Can we agree that being able to exit a building that is on fire is a very good idea? Which brings us to fire escapes and beer. By the way, if this is the picture, yeah. By the way, you can Google fucking anything. Like, I'm not kidding, man. Like, you can Google fire escape and beer, and like, there's photos of that stuff. So the occupancy limits of basically any building, from the tallest New York City skyscraper to this room here at Worthy Brewing, is primarily a question of fire egress. There's calculations that go into how you figure that out. They vary a bit by city and state. But as a general rule, you're only allowed to cram as many bodies into a room as the fire marshal says can exit if, the building's on fire. The big problem with that calculation is that it assumes that the building is occupied 100% of the time, when in fact, almost no building is fully occupied any percent of the time. So that whole office space is chronically underutilized and thus conveniently more expensive for landlords. It's actually at least half by design. It's an intentional regulatory reality. Look, New York City is full of savvy and sophisticated, if vaguely evil, real estate developers. Adam Newman's brilliance here was behind the utopian vision, we're gonna count how many people are in the building at once. You know those little RFID tags that are attached to everything now? That's it. I can give people an RFID tag and make sure that at any given moment, the egress count isn't exceeded. Circumvent artificial scarcity, print money, and milk young people for all of their rent. For all of Adam's insanity and very public fall from grace, this is not inherently a bad idea. Take a floor space that can hold 100 people, sell subscriptions to 300 people, make sure there's not more than 100 people at a time. It is not a bad idea, or at least not an unpopular commercial idea. It is exactly what every hotel and airline does. Enter stage right, whichever one was not stage left, my old friend alcohol, and 2 photos of my time at WeWork that were soaked in alcohol because I didn't know what else to put on this slide. Doing what you love is mostly a cocktail and a hammock, it turns out. Whether Adam's favored tequila or a Bend IPA, WeWork was very happy to provide all of its members as much alcohol as they could drink. And let me tell you what the fire marshal just loves. Cramming as many people as you can into a building and then getting them all drunk. My friends at Worthy Brewing, I'm sure, can attest to this particular challenge. The New York City Department of Buildings did not love this idea. The Fire Marshal of New York did not love this idea. The Neighborhood Advisory Commissions did not love this idea. No one liked this idea except property owners in New York who stood to get significantly higher lease rates on their office space. Owners and developers of real estate in New York who happen to be the primary contributors to the electoral campaigns of elected officials who in turn hold oversight hearings and sometimes pick up the phone to call their friends at the Department of Buildings. Co-working was a business model disruption, not a technological one. But that business model disruption had been hidden behind regulatory realities for a very long time. The first skyscrapers went up in Manhattan in the 1880s, right around when the knowledge was introduced in London, which means it only took 130 years for New York City to do a 180-degree turn on the idea of cramming too many drunk people into a building. For 130 years, office developers had milked one regulatory regime to guarantee scarcity, and then they and the regulators changed who they thought were the winners and losers. And suddenly WeWork was milking millions of young people of their own dreams and entrepreneurship in exchange for dubious access to fire escapes and free beer. Which brings us, finally and oddly, to the etymology of the word milk. As we just demonstrated for anyone listening closely, the word milk works handily as a verb. The roots of that usage aren't hard to figure out. It means to draw out of an animal by hand or mechanically, and it comes from the act of getting milk, the noun, out of a cow. But milk, the noun, is kind of a funny thing. The Oxford English Dictionary helps us out here. It's an opaque white fluid, rich in fat and protein, secreted by female mammals for the nourishment of their young. Okay, I'm the CEO of a gelato manufacturing company. That's a usage I'm familiar with and one I can get behind. Bonta is the only company in Bend that pasteurizes milk to make ice cream. We do so under a not easy to get license from the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So milk is sort of my jam, which is a funny phrase that younger Corey would be aghast to hear coming out of my mouth. A quick tangent about younger Corey, though. Younger Corey grew up in rural Missouri with two little sisters. My little sisters are the most amazing people you've never met, but they made some choices that were unusual in rural Missouri. Namely, they're both vegan. So even though I am a committed consumer of animals and their tasty byproducts, the availability of vegan offerings at restaurants has come to matter to me over the years. And so at Bonta, we take our rating on happy cows as seriously as we do on Yelp or Google Maps. And we make a bunch of kick-ass dairy-free gelato flavors, like those. Yeah. We make those flavors using a coconut milk base. Ah, coconut milk. Funny combination of words, that. The Oxford English Dictionary wants us to believe that milk comes from the mammary glands of mammals. And while the Tourism Board of Hawaii has long enjoyed possible associations between coconuts and mammary glands, coconut milk would seem to be an impossibility. But fear not, the Oregon Department of Agriculture comes to the rescue. They've entered the fray with the Oxford English Dictionary by categorizing coconut milk, along with soy milk and oat milk and all the others, as, quote, imitation milk products. My sisters aren't here today. There are probably some plant-powered people in the audience. Might take umbrage with that particular use of words. But sticks and stones, right? Who cares what the Oregon Department of Agriculture uses to categorize coconut milk? Well, I care. And my colleagues V and Megan care, because with that one funny little phrase, the Oregon Department of Agriculture is picking winners and losers. By categorizing coconut milk as imitation milk, they also require coconut milk, a plant product with none of the same microbial concerns as dairy milk, to be pasteurized, just as if it came from a cow. You should care about this too, because you live in a town full of plant-powered people. 23% of all scoops sold by Bonta are dairy-free, but every single one of those scoops has to go through a processing step that was imagined and rationalized for products that come from cows, which drives up the cost of every single scoop that every one of you buys, which means next time you're angry at me for our prices, don't blame me. The dairy industry in Oregon as a major employer and taxpayer hasn't always played nice with new entrants in the market. And so when the Oregon Department of Agriculture somewhat inexplicably decides to pretend that coconuts are actual mammary glands, you don't have to have that vivid an imagination to wonder if the government is again picking winners and losers. And right now, some of you are thinking, oh my God, the CEO of Bonta Gelato is a rabid libertarian who hates regulations and regulators. To be clear, I do not think that. I think regulations are the set of rules that civilized societies agree on. So I don't kill you with bad milk, and so you pick up your dog's poop from Phil's trail. I think most regulators are doing important, underappreciated, and underpaid work, including, and especially for what it's worth, the inspectors at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. Here are the three things that I would like for you to take away from today's talk. Well, that our packaging is really sweet, actually, but the first thing I'd like for you to take away, that no new business, no new technology, no new entrant into the market can or should ignore the competitive implications of regulation. Because one of two things is true. Either you operate in a regulated market, in which case you should be paying attention to the fact that they pick winners and losers, and often were written by the winners. Or you operate in an as yet unregulated market, in which case hang on tight, because nothing is more fun than watching lawyers try to parse the business model that you've invested all of your hopes, dreams, and rent money into. The second thing, picking winners and losers is actually part of what regulation is supposed to do. If I make a bad batch of ice cream and it kills you, you should want the government to categorize me as a loser. That's the way that's supposed to work. Regulation, even regulation written by and for an industry, is not anathema to innovation. The challenge is simply that regulators are, by design, resistant to disruption. Some disruption is inherently good, some is inherently bad, but nearly all of it sits in the middle. It's a trade of one societal good for another. And so you should be deeply suspicious of overzealous regulators promising safety and security for all, just as much as you are of tech bro charlatans who promise you tequila-soaked utopias. The third and final thing, local elections matter. Plot twist there at the end, I know. Though if you heard the CEO of EDCO earlier, he was saying much the same thing. The stories I told you tonight involved not presidents and parliaments. They involved state and local governments. And I'm going to guess that even though you're not watching the debate and you're listening to me yammer on right now, every single person in this room has a strong opinion about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And I'm going to, he's watching it. That's a tough thing to see. He's literally watching the debate right now. Please excuse me for a moment. You probably have strong opinions about Donald Trump and Joe Biden, just as I suspect every one of you is developing strong opinions about the use of, say, artificial intelligence in choosing what healthcare your family gets or what lesson plans are in your kids' classrooms. But the policymakers and regulators who will decide what happens in your family's hospitals and classrooms are not named Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And my guess is not a one of you in the room can easily tell me the name of your state representative. Though when I typed that, I didn't realize it. Yeah, I'm realizing now, a bunch of you probably can. So right now, some of you are waiting for me to say, if you look under seats, you get a lifetime supply of gelato, and you get a lifetime supply of gelato. You don't, I'm sorry. What you get is discussions of etymology and an admonition to go vote that I feel very deeply. Also, you should buy gelato. I want to thank Edco very much for having me here tonight. I want to thank Roger Lee at Summit Bank for reconnecting me to this great organization. I want to thank Worthy Brewing for hosting us in their kick-ass facility, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really fun. And thank you for acknowledging that guy, because this whole time I was like, who is that guy? What's he doing? What is he doing? Why is he right there? Here, I'm going to give you this back, because you're going to probably need it. Gosh, the only thing I'm mad about is that I don't have a nice dish of salted vanilla in my hand.
You and me both.
Do you carry those tiny spoons around with you, or?
I eat it with my hands. I eat it with my hands because that's how God intended you to eat things. It turns out all food is tastier when on a stick. If you haven't had our gelato pops, go to Bend Rock Gym, the High Desert Museum, or Brasada Ranch, and you can get our dairy-free coconut milk base Mayan chocolate on a stick. Look at that.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Every time I think of coconut milk, all I'm going to see is boobies now.
Yeah,
so
you and me
thanks
both.
for that. Thanks
you
for
and me
that.
both. Or a pasteurization vat. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I actually can't believe that's happening. That's wild. Well, this was an amazing talk. Thank you so much. You really
Thank you for
covered
having me.
a lot of ground. We really went a lot of different places. I'm wondering if anyone in the crowd has yes, right here, Julianne. How did you go from WeWorks to gelato? This is an excellent question.
So, I mean, the little bio that was kindly read wasn't a lie. It's a tasty midlife crisis. At some point, you realize that you've been telling pretty stories for bad men. And, that's fun for a while, except for, they're not going to write on your tombstone, write a great speech for Travis Kalanick. They're probably also not going to write pasteurized coconut milk to make kick-ass ice cream, but, they're not going to write anything on my tombstone, so I'd rather make ice cream. I think Steve Jobs I think it's heretical, but I think Steve Jobs allegedly said, if you want to make people happy, don't be a leader, sell ice cream. I just want to make people happy.
I think you can put whatever you want on your tombstone.
There you go.
I like the coconut milk line. That's special. Any other questions in the audience? Yes, in the back. Roger.
Similar story, DC to Bend.
DC to Bend. How did that happen?
So it happened coming out, especially 15 years ago. Prineville's an awesome place, but 15 years ago it was a smaller, less awesome place. And so when you spend a lot of time here sleeping in hotels, you go to Worthy Brewing and Deschutes Brewing and 10 Barrel Brewing. You go to all the breweries. And my wife, who's long-suffering, in the middle of COVID, we were like, fuck this. We're going to pack our skis and our dog, and we're going to go find a place to hang out for a little bit. And on our second day here, I'm on a conference call for some job that I didn't enjoy. And she's like, I'm going to meet you at the brewery here at Worthy Brewing. And I show up, and she's got one empty glass and one half-full glass. And she says, Corey, I've made a decision. We're moving to Bend. There you go.
We probably could have guessed that. Yes, Emma.
How's your new location going?
How's your new location going? Great
Well,
question.
I'm so glad you asked. If you haven't been to our new location on Galveston Avenue, right next to our friends at 10 Barrel Brewing, it's a really amazing little spot. Any of you who know Alex Collins at Blue 40 Architecture or the fine folks at KelCon, they did amazing work. And V and Megan, who you saw a picture of earlier, make kick-ass dairy-free ice cream that you can eat there as well. It's an awesome location. Thank you very much for asking.
It is exactly what Galveston needed.
I agree.
Yeah, it is 100%. Galveston was nothing,
Well,
and now it's everything.
Well, because it had beer, it had burgers,
It had gas
it had
stations.
bagels, it had gas stations,
Yeah.
but no gelato.
Bars that stay open
Yeah,
late and
yeah.
then no gelato, and now
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
Okay, I had another question. Yes. Bonta or bonta? Bonta? How do you say it? Great question.
The last one there at the end is apparently the correct answer, bonta, but literally none of you are ever going to say that, and I'm sure so I'm not going to say that 10 times a day. So you can say it however you want as long as you can buy a scoop. We say bonta, but you can say it however you want.
What's your favorite flavor?
So the actual origin story of me buying the company, Jeff and Julie Labhart, who if any of you know, built an amazing company. I can take no credit for it. When we moved to Bend, my wife was like, hey, there's this gelato place in town, and there's always this line out the door. We should go check it out. And I'm like, fuck lines. I don't wait in lines. Like, that sounds awful. Fast forward 6 months, she's like, we're going to the gelato place. All right, we're going to the gelato place. And I'm, grumbling the whole time in line. We get up there, and I'm like, screw this. I'm not getting anything fancy. I'm getting strawberry. Our roasted strawberry is divine. So I'm not kidding. Any of you after this, come find me, and I will personally invite you to our creamery. And on the days that either we roast strawberries or we bake brownies for our back porch coffee and brownies flavor, it smells like heaven. So roasted strawberry and honey is my favorite flavor.
Love it, love it. Okay, and yes, in the back.
What were your strategies for working through the crazy part of the genius?
What were your strategies for working through the crazy part of the genius?
Am I allowed to say excessive amounts of alcohol? I'm only sort of kidding about that. Awkward. Look, I think, so a number of these guys, and they're nearly all guys, right? Like, if you hate them or if you love them, the phrase reality distortion field gets used a lot. And the way that I've tried to internalize that is like, the great ideas of every generation will seem inevitable to your children, right? Like, it's like this doesn't work for SaaS products, by the way, because no one, like, you need domain knowledge. But consumer products, like, it's a question of, like, the thing that doesn't exist today, but my children, one generation behind me, will be like, of course that fucking exists. It's always existed. It never didn't exist. And I think, to me, that's the filter, is like, the reality distortion field required to do any of those companies that I've worked for is insane. Like, it's very close to, like actually not healthy. But every one of them did latch on to a thing where I'm like, my kids will like not understand that I could not get a taxi and sometimes chose driving home drunk. That will be something that no one in this room's children will understand. And Travis was on to that. He was also on to being a bunch of like horrible, awful things, but like, to me, it was like, you latch onto that, you latch onto the inevitability and try to let the rest of it wash over you. That and a lot of beer. Yeah.
Okay, I think I have another question. I saw somebody, oh yes, in the back. Where do you want Bonta to be in like 5 years?
Yeah. I want to give you a glib answer, but this is something I think a lot about. So the actual answer is like, I want to sell every scoop of ice cream in Central Oregon. Like that, like it's fairly modest, but it's a funny thing, our industry, and it's not unlike a lot of others. I don't know what industries everyone works in, but it's an extremely fragmented industry. Like, everyone who's had a dream of like telling their like awful boss, screw you, I'm going to go do my own thing, has thought about a coffee shop, a bakery, or wait for it, an ice cream shop, which means you have 287 ice cream shops in Oregon. We are the #1 rated of 287. And unlike 260 of them, we make our own product. I love the Bonta brand, I love our packaging, I love all of this stuff. But the truth is, it's a purchase of opportunity. You buy it because it's freaking hot and it's tasty, and I want more of it. And so the vision for us is, how do we make amazing ice cream, own our supply chain, own our production process, drive prices down, and make that available to all of the like people who go to EDCO meetings who are thinking about telling their boss to fuck off and open an ice cream shop. Like, I want to be a supplier to dreams. I don't need to have a big one myself.
I like that you said it was hot. When
Yeah.
It's actually,
I know.
it's cold.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, but it worked. It worked.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I have one more question in the audience. Who's it going to be? Huh? Okay. Oh, shoot. Okay, you.
Gotta sneak it in there.
Sneak it in.
So what's the strategy for selling ice cream in the wintertime?
What's the strategy for selling ice cream in the wintertime?
This is why it's really important to own your own supply chain. Not kidding. As in, like we go into hibernation. Like, I mean, if you ran our business in Dallas, Texas, you're a 12-month business. If you run this business in Central Oregon, you're a 4-month business. That's really hard if you don't control your supply chain. If you don't make your own product, you're buying off of a Cisco truck at the same price in December as you are in July. We make our own stuff. We choose when to make it. We choose how to make it within the confines of the Oregon Department of Agriculture, of course. Cool.
Some of us eat more ice cream in the winter, but that's
You know what's funny?
another talk, I guess.
I'm told that non-alcoholic beer is the #1 seller in grocery stores right now. For us, it's actually winter is when you peak at grocery stores.
That makes sense.
If you're ever wondering, you peak in your purchasing of ice cream in the winter.
That tracks.
It does.
Yeah, that tracks.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
You're
Thank you so much.
amazing. Thank you so much.